You are seeing the actions that you are seeing out of the Queensland government, and you will increasingly see them out of the Western Australian government, is because the purpose of these two state Labor governments is to destabilise the coalition vote heading into the federal election. Put simply, Queensland promised before the last election, and of course they were so richly rewarded because of the whole keeping us safe nonsense, that they would have an unemployment rate that would be higher than the rest of the country till at least June of this year. Western Australia, again, bounces about national average, but so often can end up on top of it, pretending that somehow, magically, there's no money coming in from the rest of the country, but as we've shown you, even via their own budget papers, the single greatest source of revenue to the Western Australian government is money from the rest of the country, Commonwealth grants. So what they are trying to do is they are trying to pick off, if they can, a vote here, a vote there, a seat here, a seat there, to take their state election performance and move it over to a federal election. Now remember, when the government is technically just a majority right now, to lose one here or to lose one there is going to push it either into minority, which means they have to Gillard style go cap in hand to others to rule the country for 3 years with all of those compromises, or if they can move 4 or 6 seats, then of course we're talking about Prime Minister Albo, and KK ends up sitting around the cabinet table and Penny Wong ends up taking a place around. You get the point. So it was interesting to see a comparison of the last 3 months of news poll data and compare that to the last 3 months of last year in news poll data, because my theory is starting to play out here, not just about the own goals the government might score on itself, but how politicians like Miles are going to try to make all of the failures of the state government the federal government responsibility, despite the fact that millions of people are only in a job because of JobKeeper, only made possible because of the decisions of the federal government. For all the bitching, moaning and patting on the back about the wonderful state responses, unless the federal government closed the border to the rest of the world with 120 million cases of coronavirus, it would have gone rampant here. But let's go state by state to give you an idea of who's up, who's down and where the government could potentially be heading for some issues coming into the election next year. According to News Poll, it is 50-50 in New South Wales. That is backwards for Team Blue, forward for Team Red. In Victoria, amazingly, the Liberal Party is up. Now remember, this was supposedly the absolute burial ground at the last election. Now yes, there's going to be an extra seat that'll be added to the Labor column, but it shows that the ones that they've been able to hold on to in Victoria, they might be able to strengthen in the next little while. That's if all these polls are true, but we all remember polls are a bit like the Pons Institute, not entirely worth betting the house on. As for Queensland though, yes, the LNP is still well in front of Labor, but you can see quite a turnaround. 4 points that have come off the federal government in that state. That's why Stephen Miles is going as hard as he does. It's why Anastasia Palaszczuk says we're not to blame for anything bad, despite the fact that anyone actually paying attention knows that they have said up front that they expect things to get bad, if not worse, in part because of the decisions they have taken to close their borders. And make no mistake, the reason that little quick lockdown happened in Brisbane was because they wanted to make sure that businesses right on the edge sacked people after JobKeeper had finished just a couple of days earlier. South Australia, this is the worst news for the government because they are down 6 points. They are down 6 points in South Australia, a full 10 points behind Labor. Now, is that because South Australia has an issue with Scott Morrison as Prime Minister? I'll show you the data why that's not the case, but perhaps old mate Premier Marshmallow, this is your first chance to be able to vote against, showing that the Liberal brand under Premier Marshmallow going backwards. As for Western Australia, and again, remember what happened here, a massive turnaround where Labor, if they were able to do that at a federal election, they wouldn't just win, they would romp it home. Despite the fact that Western Australia has actually lost a seat, which now goes to that extra seat in Victoria, there'll be some problems for the LNP if those numbers come true. So as you can see, there's a problem in Queensland, there's a problem in Western Australia. You have two hyper-partisan machines, well practiced at how to play state politics, and state politicians who have been empowered by their communities to be able to blame everyone but themselves for the things they are directly responsible for. So why do I have hope? Why am I not like those who, and I always love these people, the people who claim to be on the conservative side of politics, claim to believe in Team Blue, but of course they're the first ones to say, well, maybe they're not doing as well because they're not pure enough. They're not enough like me. And then, of course, when there is a surprise election victory, they're the first to point to it and say, well, I've always believed in the quiet Australians. Ignore all those people. Remember the show, They Got It Right. They can hear those quiet Australians all day, every day. And from time to time, we'll just shut up because the sound of my own voice is not the most important one in the country when it comes to these sorts of issues. Scott Morrison is still the preferred Prime Minister, and I have said this to you so many times because I want you to see the picture here, that you've got the brand of Team Red, the brand of Team Blue, but the best asset for Team Blue is still the Prime Minister. Now, despite the fact of all the bullshit that you have heard and read, and everyone who's professionally there to talk about politics, in the past 3 months, preferred Prime Minister Scott Morrison, 57 to Albo 28, 1 point. That's it. And where did it go? Not to Albo, but to the undecided column. And in all of those states where supposedly the Liberal vote is down 6%, 4%, 3%, 2%, even 1%, Morrison leads Albanese by 26 points in New South Wales, 21 in Victoria, 40 points in Queensland, 25 points in South Australia, and 41 points in Western Australia. So will the next election be a lot like the last one? You betcha. To all those who professionally think that somehow the sky is falling in, learn how to read all of the chart, not just the bit that you like to read.